Hello. How's it going, everybody? Welcome, workers and friends. I'm your host, Dust James, the Marxist Leninist truck driver. This is the continuing interview series at Anti Imperialist America. And we are very honored to have somebody who I am a big fan of, brother Carl Zha. How you doing?
Hey, how are you, Dust?
I'm doing all right. I just finished a over 12-hour work day and a work week, and it's a nice Friday evening, and this is a great place to be. And let's see. Ain't it morning over there?
Yep, we
Where are you
are
coming?
exactly 12 hours apart. I'm 12 hours ahead of you, so I'm in the future right now.
Oh
the,
wow,
the
it's
yeast is the
Saturday.
future, my friend.
Hey, I still got a whole Friday left of my weekend go.
It's Saturday morning already, 8
All
a.m.
right,
Yeah.
all right. So, um, any this is your first time on the show here. Shout out to brother Jean Yu, Bolshevik rapper, for helping to introduce us. There's a few videos and studies with him on this channel that are very popular. Folks can go back and look at that. Also, shout out to brother Ramiro Sebastian Funes. I had the privilege to go on his show with Carl Zha talking about the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Party, and folks can go and check that out as well. Today, we're doing something kind of similar to what Ramiro does at unmasking imperialism. And I was driving down the road and I put on, a Caleb Maupin podcast. I'm a big fan of his, learning about Marxism, and then for some reason when it ended, this Fox News video came up, and it was said some horrible, disgusting things about our brothers and sisters over there in China, and about
So
their popular
YouTube
government.
algorithm decided they need to counteract all these Marxist-Leninist indoctrination by give you some dosage of real American Fox News style propaganda.
uh, Yeah, and it was sure enough, and it got me angry. And I'm like, I got to do something about this. And I was like, I know this expert on China, brother Carl Zha. I'm going to have him on here. So I'm going to play that clip, and then I'm going to attempt to debunk some stuff. And Carl Zha is going to come in and really hammer it home. So this, I kind of got off track. So this is your first time on this channel. Maybe just a quick introduction about yourself before we get started.
Hi, I am Carl Zha. I am the host of Silk and Steel podcast, which is a podcast primarily focused on China surrounding regions, the history, culture, and politics. I was born and grew up in China back in 1976, 1 month after Mao died. I came to US in 1990, just before I turned 14, and I went to high school, college in US. I worked in US for almost 30 years. I lived in US for almost 30 years, and now I'm in Bali, Indonesia. I've been living here for almost 3 years since July 4th, 2019. That was my Independence Day. So here I am talking to you, Dust. Always a pleasure to speak to you.
Right on. So I'll just go ahead and see if we can play this clip, and then we'll respond.
China. They may be America's most formidable foe ever. I'm talking about competing against them economically as well as militarily. They're winning an undeclared war as well. All about fentanyl. Here's a quick history lesson.
150 years ago, the West, led by the British, was flooding China with opium. Yes, the opium trade opened the door to alarming drug abuse nationwide, creating up to 12 million addicts in China. The world's first drug cartel kept China, a nation then of 450 million people, compliant and feeble. Fast forward to 1949, post-World War II.
Led leader Mao Zedong, chairman of the Communist Party.
Mao Zedong leads a communist revolution. Slowly, by weaving in some capitalist principles, China transformed into an economic and military superpower it is today. China prides themselves on their extensive long-term planning, and they never forget, still looking to pay back Japan for their World War II occupation, and to the West for driving years of national drug addiction. We weren't even a part of the Opium Wars, but they seem to be targeting America. Getting payback by flooding our nation with this generation's opium, fentanyl. So powerful, one dose can kill. China is sending in the opioid to American soil using Mexican drug cartels to bring across our wide open borders. Just this week, an Arizona Border Patrol canine sniffed out 12 pounds of fentanyl, enough to kill 3 million people. Stop! This year alone, more than 5,000 pounds have been stopped at the border. We have become the unwitting best customers, resulting too often in instant death, addiction, and millions of broken families. More than 150 Americans die every day from overdoses from these synthetic opioids. What's especially insidious, China's fentanyl is hitting America's youth hard. In fact, a CDC report reveals 77% of teen overdose deaths involved fentanyl last year. Opioid overdoses increased 94% from 2019 to 2020 in kids 14 to 18, the number rising another 20% the following year. Is China targeting America in a modern-day opium war? Seems that way.
That's enough of that. That's enough of that.
This is you're not going to show the whole video? They're going to bring a China expert on at Mike.
No, I just wanted to do. You're the China expert on the on today's show. I just want to put that, it's a very highly emotional clip. I think this is very effective propaganda here in the United States, both from the inner cities to the rural areas, with increasing poverty, with loss of jobs, decaying infrastructure. We're seeing more and more drug addiction, more and more drug deaths, wasted, ruined lives, destroyed communities, and it's a really sad thing. And this news service, Fox News, there's a few others. I think my dad watches Newsmax. It's a very effective at getting people riled up over a real problem that affects the American people.
Yeah.
And who do they say they're going to blame on it? Well, this is all China's fault. Well, that's absolutely absurd. It's crazy. It's the same people that own this news service. It's the same billionaires that own this news service that are actually the cause of the loss of jobs, of the loss of infrastructure, of the loss of public resources. And it's my understanding that fentanyl isn't being pushed on China. Isn't being pushed by China in the United States. And in reality, it's actually a series of pharmaceutical compounds that are imported, separately, either into Mexico or here, and then made. So yes. China is they're not involved at all. They're simply producing much needed pharmaceuticals for the world's people, for health, and then it's being made in the fentanyl and got here. Anything to add on those specific issues?
Oh yeah, this is why I say anytime U.S. media talks about China, it's all projection, right? First they go to the history of Opium War, and then they turn it around and say, oh, it's China now is waging a modern opium war on United States. And you see they keep on saying China's fentanyl, China's undeclared war on U.S., but they didn't present you any evidence where China has a state directive to pump fentanyl in United States. Like you mentioned already, what China produces is these different pharmaceutical companies producing the precursor chemicals that can be used as a component to make fentanyl. And what happened is the gangs they import them into Mexico or United States, and then manufacture, synthesize the actual product. The actual fentanyl is made it in on North American continent, and then sold to the consumers. And there's also a part about they're saying we are unwittingly become the best customer. Like, how do you unwittingly take a drug? You know, like you how did you unwittingly just decide to be addicted? I mean, like, there's a lot of projection. And also I wanted to go back to the history, because they're trying to deflect. First they say, oh, we have nothing to do with Opium War, right? United States had nothing to do with Opium War, but we're being unfairly targeted by China. First of all, we already debunked the fentanyl story, which is not true. China is not waging a modern opium war on United States. But go back to the original Opium War. It's true, United States was not involved in the war part of the Opium War. It was British that invaded China to force China to accept opium. But United States is very much involved in the opium trade, right? Britain had about 85% of the Chinese opium market before the Opium War, and the other 15% is supplied by United States. In fact, U.S. Most of the New England elite, the old money in United States, got started in the opium trade with China. FDR's grandfather, Warren Delano, made his fortune smuggling opium into Canton, China, when he was a teenager. And this goes to the Forbes family. John Forbes made his money in the opium trade. Then he took the opium money to United States and started investing. He started a investment bank, and so in a way, U.S. industrialization seed money came from the opium money made in China, and all the higher institutions of learning, Harvard, Yale, all of them had endowments from these opium running families. So the opium trade is very much entwined into earlier U.S. history. So I just like to point that out. So the fact that they say, oh, we have nothing to do with it. Well, we have a lot to do with it. We were part of the opium trade with China. And that's something that we're not even taught here. That's why they can just flat out lie about it and deny it on television. But again, the opioid crisis is real in U.S. And what they don't want to talk about is how our own government agency, how CIA pushed the opioid crisis on United States. We had there was a point in time when the heroin addicts in U.S. were cut off during World War II because the Japanese cut off all the supply route from East Asia. But after the war, after World War II is ended, so that was the best chance for basically the entire addict population of U.S. to go cold turkey. But after the war, U.S. financed and supported the KMT remnant army that fled from mainland China into northern Myanmar, and they developed the Golden Triangle area, which is northern Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos. And they developed into the world's highest production base of opium and heroin before the NATO occupation of Afghanistan. So for years, the Golden Triangle supplied opium and the opium derivatives like heroin. And during the Vietnam War, the American GI stationed in Vietnam created new demand, and that's when the Golden Triangle started producing heroin specifically for the American GIs in Vietnam. And when the American GIs came back home, they brought the heroin epidemic back. Made it worse. And the CIA, and again, we all know about CIA involvement in cocaine trade and getting basically fanning the crack epidemic inside the United States. Fox News will never talk about that because that does not fit their agenda. It's much easier. Let's pointing fingers at China, even for something they did not do. Right? I mean, it's true. The like you said, the chemical precursors for fentanyl is producing pharmaceutical companies. But the problem is right now there's some multinational gangs that are importing these pharmaceuticals
let's,
and then
let's
making
talk
drugs.
about let's talk about that as the next point. So
Yeah.
the first big scary word, China. China's evil and they're flooding America with drugs. No, they're not. It's been our government, the same rich billionaires. It's actually the same 5 or 6 families hooked to these damn banking cartels, hooked to these oil companies that has these very same individuals who were involved in the opium wars, or their family members were involved in the opium wars. Their families who destroyed China and kept China in poverty are now turning on the own U.S. population and keeping us poor while their empire falls. Now, the other scare word was Mexico. Oh, these horrible Mexican drug tails on behalf of the Chinese are flooding, America. Well, this is another thing that's extremely insulting. My wife is from Mexico. My son is half Mexican, and just the amount of racism against Mexican people and the fear mongering against Mexican people is absolutely disgusting. And in reality, before the current government, the progressive populist government that came together almost in a political revolution, it was a new party, the Moderna Party, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, who has been making positive reforms. Before that, I mean, the Mexican presidents were almost directly controlled by the United States, and and Mexico has been kept in poverty, has been an exploited country, where things like drug cartels and other things terrorize the Mexican people. And these Mexican drug cartels have been given weapons by the United States and have had their money laundered. And these very same banking institutions that go back to the opium wars in China and here. So maybe a little bit of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, U.S. destroyed the Mexican economy and created the condition for the drug cartel could flourish. Because what they don't talk about is how U.S. cut off the water supply of Colorado River. They dam Colorado River so they keep all the waters in Nevada, in California, to water the farm field there, and then northern Mexico. Farming is no longer sustainable in northern Mexico because United States took all their water, and then these impoverished farmers became migrant farmers to come to California, to work for these big agricultural business to pick strawberries, American farms, and then they all get blamed for being unwanted immigrants, right? When California. I lived in California for a long time, so I know California economy rely on these migrant farmers. Like if you take away these migrant workers from Mexico, you're not going to have janitors, you're not going to have gardeners, you're not going to have babysitters, you're not going to have whole bunch of service people. And yet, despite the fact that California economy is very much dependent on these migrant workers from Mexico, the same people are looked down upon. They're being blamed for our social problems, right? And it's unfair and it's racist. And then again, like everything is projection. We're not overlooking the fact that U.S. have impoverished Mexico to the point where the only choice for people there is either crossing hazardous border crossing to come work in the United States for low, below minimum wage work, or join the drug cartels.
So while you're on the drug cartel, so in the video it alluded that there's connections between the Mexican drug cartels and China. Is that accurate?
I mean, show me the evidence, right? Like people they're making bold claims, but they just assume, they just say the magic word China, right? And like that just covers everything. Somehow magically there's a connection. Where show me the money, show me the connection. But their listeners probably so brainwashed they don't need to be bothered to do fact checking. Fact checking is hard because how do you prove in something that's not there? I mean, how do you prove the negative, right? That's what they do all the time.
So let's go into this very brief Chinese history they gave. So they talk about the Opium War, which we know now that the U.S. Ruling class was heavily involved with. And then right from the Opium War, they go to the Chinese Revolution, and they made it look all scary, and they made it look all horrible. And then it says, but slowly, with capitalist reforms, China was able to become prosperous. Now that is
this is like the very most common refrain. It's like, okay, so China is powerful because of capitalism, right? Because like everything good must come from capitalism. Now, for the people, that's and for a lot of this is a lot of common refrain when people talk about China. Like they say, no, China, we shouldn't give the credit to the Chinese government. It's the Chinese people that pulled themselves up by the bootstrap, right? And they just Chinese government just step away a little bit, loosen up the control, and suddenly the economy just boomed. Now, China didn't have a communist government before 1949, before Mao's revolution, right? It was horrible. You had the Opium Wars, you have the foreign invasion. That was China before 1949 was not a communist society. It was not a communist economy. How did it work out back then? Was the Chinese government people less hardworking then? Hardly. Chinese people have always been hardworking. Like didn't back in 19th century, the Chinese people not having work ethics? I mean, that's bogus. They're as hardworking as they're now, except they weren't allowed to develop their full potential, and there's a reason for that. That's a history of the Opium War, of the foreign invasions, of the imperialist exploitation, and then it's very it's like did a sleight of hand. So like Mao revolution took over, and suddenly with capitalist injection, boom, they become a superpower. I mean, that's not that most of the world is organized in the capitalist system, right? Under the imperialist system. Not every country in the world turned out to be China. So that is my counter argument. How do you say capitalism made it a superpower? Why didn't make, say, like any other country a superpower?
Right on. Well, maybe I can give my perspective on it, then you can correct me.
Sure.
My understanding, well, first of all, we always hear about famines in China, in communist China. Oh, the horrible, either inept or evil, or inept and evil at the same time, somehow mass murdered their own people with a famine. But what they don't talk about is there was massive Western imposed famines in capitalism before the Chinese Revolution. And the Chinese Revolution actually helped industrialize agriculture, stabilize agriculture, organize agriculture, and it helped save lives, and it helped feed people. And there was problems, especially with the U.S. Not purposely trying to contain and attack China, purposely trying to get China and Russia to fight against each other. When they were allies, the U.S. was attacking Russia as well, and trying to sabotage their economy. And there was a lot of growth. There was a lot of growth after Deng Xiaoping, if I'm saying that right. But what happened was it was not a restoration of capitalism. It was the use of markets within an overall socialist system, and it was a revolution, and it harnessed. You said I like that when you said that the Chinese workers lifted themselves up by their bootstraps, and in a way, it's true that it was the Chinese working class through hard work, but it was the socialist government that was able to unleash the labor of the people
Yes.
and organize the people to build up their country. And they had debts that they had to pay back on top of having all these debts and all these favorable policies that helped U.S. businesses and sent all these goods over here. Both the Chinese government and the Chinese working class were able to build up and raise their country out of poverty with Chinese socialism, or socialism with Chinese characteristics.
Yeah, I mean, like the last famine was the Great Famine of between 1959 and 1962, and that is been constantly talked about in the Western media as like look at the communist famines. But what people don't talk about is before 1949 communist victory, China had famines every 2 or 3 years in many different parts of the country. That was a very common occurrence. And after 1960, that have stopped. There's no more famines in China today. And this is something. I came to United States in 1990. Back then, people would still say to American children, like, finish your food. There are people starving in China. But in 1990, that was definitely not true, right? And it's even less true today. But you're right, because the Chinese people, working class people, have always been hardworking, but they weren't given the chance to reach their full potential prior, because they have to. In Chinese, they say that there's three big mountains on top of them. There's the mountains of the capitalist exploitation, the feudalist exploitation, the feudal landlords, and the imperialism, right? The imperialist exploitation. And so they have to, through the communist revolution, they overthrew their shackles, and they built up the infrastructure, they built up a basic education system, because before communist revolution, 90% of the Chinese people are illiterate, right? And so what Mao's revolution did done right is universal education system, healthcare, and that and building up the infrastructures. That built the foundation for Deng Xiaoping era, when Deng Xiaoping introduced the market economies within the socialist framework. And that is when the boom that happened. And again, China is not a capitalist society. If China were a capitalist society like United States, Jack Ma, the head of Alibaba, will be writing the constitution, like I like to say, right? Like, people, yes, there are billionaires in China, no doubt, but the billionaires in China have nowhere near the power that billionaires in the United States have in influencing policy. In fact, the Chinese Communist Party makes the policy, and the billionaires, and like everyone else, they have to go by that. They have to go by the rules set forth. In United States, we have the billionaires writing the rules, setting down the rule, but through their lobbies, through the media they own. Bezos owns the Washington Post. So they control everything. It's very heavily manipulated society. United States at this point is basically oligarchy masquerading as a democracy, and they achieved that by massive amount of propaganda pumped out like Fox News. So I'm actually surprised you didn't. There's actually a lot of more outrageous content in the latter half of the Fox News clip. I think we should watch the rest, and there might be more critique.
Okay. Okay. If you're willing to go a little longer, maybe I'll talk. We'll go ahead and finish.
Yeah.
the critique of that section, we went over um, most of it, but this horrible idea that everything this government does to us is somehow the fault of China.
Yep.
Another misconception is that, oh, um, the Chinese, they're shipping all our jobs over to China, and the Chinese people stole our jobs. And the reason why they shut down the factory 20 years ago and they boarded up Main Street is because of China. And this is absolutely um, absurd because it is U.S. companies that
Yes.
sell us the good, that buy things over there, that shut down the factories here. And the Chinese government and the Chinese people gave these Western corporations very good deals, and then they sold us these goods at high prices over here. So I mean,
So,
maybe you could talk a little bit on that myth.
yeah, I mean that's a very good point to address because this is the problem that the United States have faced since 1970s was hollowing up of manufacturing base, right? Offsourcing of the jobs. Was all done by our multinational companies, and initially it wasn't even to China; it was to other U.S. client states in East Asia. First to Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, all the so-called Asian tiger economies. And then when China opened up under Deng Xiaoping, and China was operating under the premise that if you build it, they will come. So China already built up a whole series of infrastructure. They were giving preferential tax incentives for companies to come set up shop, and that's when the Western multinationals realized, hey, if we head over to China, it's even cheaper than Taiwan, Korea, Singapore, and Hong Kong. And under capitalism, the capitalist will always chase the highest margin, lowest cost. So it's a no-brainer. They go to China. China already have a highly educated workforce that at the time working for very low wages. So they made the decision then to move their factory and production to China. They would have done that, if they have an opportunity in any other country, right? So even those now those manufacturing job like the making shoes and toys, now when Chinese wage start rising, these factories are actually moving out of China now. The labor intensive industries like making shoes and toys, now they're moving to Vietnam and Cambodia, where wages are even lower. And as long as we have these multinationals, those jobs are not coming back. As long as we have those multinationals at helm in the United States, those jobs, manufacturing is not coming back to the United States, right? But we cannot blame those multinationals because these are the ones that are running this country inside the United States. We cannot point the problem is exactly capitalism, right? And that Fox News can't say that. They're owned by these rich people, right? And they're owned by Richard Murdoch and his same class of people. So they can't everything they say about China and U.S. is a projection. Okay, let's bring this segment.
All right, let's go ahead, and I don't know how far we'll go. Just let me know when you want me to stop. I think I can hear you.
How long till we acknowledge this China attack, stop the flow at its source, and block it at our border? Hard to imagine any issue more important to the fabric of this nation.
All right, let's expand on this. Let's bring in Michael Pillsbury, a senior fellow and director for Chinese strategy at the Hudson Institute, and author of this book, The 100-Year Marathon. Michael, am I overstating this? Is this a redux to the Opium War?
So I want to pause for a second.
There's a certain parallel, and one thing strengthens your case, Brian.
Yeah, I got one screen, so thanks. Go ahead.
Okay. Just go ahead. Let's just go ahead.
No, it's already paused. Make your comment.
Okay, great. So Michael Pillsbury is an old Cold War warrior, right? So in late 1970s, 1980s, when in the 70s, when Nixon visited China, Michael Pillsbury was so excited about China because he wanted to play the China cards against Soviet Union. And this guy was all in, like he loved China back then. He loved the fact that China is finally going to join hands with the United States to contain Soviet Union. Now, of course, with the Soviet collapse, he did a 180 turn. Now he's like a total China hawk because, China is now has rise to a point to challenge U.S. hegemony. That's all it's about. I mean, guys like him who work for like think tanks and work for like funded by U.S. Weapon manufacturers, these guys, only thing they care about is maintaining the U.S. hegemony. But I just find it funny because this guy, he used to be a great lover of China, like in the 1970s after Nixon visit, because he loved the fact now U.S. will have China on its side to confront Soviet Union, right? But now the Cold War 1.0 is over. He wants Cold War 2.0 with China. Okay, so with that's the background. Let's keep going.
And that you didn't mention, on Chinese television, when they show the Opium War, they don't just show the British. They show American merchants kind of hanging around or being on the ships or somehow involved. So you're actually factually correct. The Americans were not part of the Opium War in 1840, but the Chinese are not portraying that way domestically. They're saying we are involved in this. So therefore, the idea of punishment or revenge against the Americans makes more sense inside China.
Michael, I watched them lock down 24 million people because of
a
variant, and it gives them an asymptomatic symptom, right? So no symptoms.
So again, we address this. U.S. is not involved in the actual war in 1840, but U.S. was involved in the opium trade. So the Chinese television portraying American merchants standing around, that is factually correct. And again, I like to. There's a lot of projection derived from kind of this guilty conscience, because if you actually talk to Chinese people, yes, Chinese people are not happy about the Opium War history, but nobody is talking about taking revenge for the Opium War to wreck the modern West. I grew up in China in 1980s. Very few Chinese people, they're angry about historical injustices, but nobody is talking about actual taking revenge on the West for the Opium War. And like, for Americans to visit China, any Westerners who visit China, they can attest to that. Chinese people are very friendly towards the Westerners. Like they're not associating you with the atrocities that committed on China by the Westerners in 1840, right? And so this is absolutely projection. They're talking with a guilty conscience. They know exactly what U.S. and the West has done to China, and now they're afraid that China is going to do to U.S. what their ancestors have done to China. This is what really it's about. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
I'll just go ahead and keep going.
At all. If they wanted to stop fentanyl in an oppressive country like this, yes, couldn't they stop it? Don't they know where it is, where it's made?
That's a great question. I think they could stop it in something like 1 week. They know where the precursors are. They know where these gangs operate from. We even know this, Brian, because the Chinese have made a kind of seductive appeal to a lot of American government officials. If you just treat China more nicely, don't sell weapons to Taiwan, don't complain about the Uyghurs, then we will help you with these Mexican gangs. But the Chinese strategy has been to blame Mexico for all of this and claim that they're not involved. We know they're involved. They're involved also in the money laundering part of it.
I just wanted to stop it there. There was quite a bit mentioned. So apparently, China is pressuring the U.S. to not sell weapons to Taiwan. Why is the U.S. arming a part of China against China in the first place? That's kind of crazy.
I mean, he's fully reminiscent of the fact that Nixon went to China in 1972, signed the Shanghai Communique, which recognized there's only one China, and that was the position of both sides of Taiwan Strait. But he is just lying on television because it's not like he's ignorant. He was fully involved with the Nixon visit. He's fully involved with the U.S.-China relations, and he knows U.S. official government policy is a one China policy, right? And then again, she said we need to arm Taiwan, and it gets even worse if we keep going. It gets even worse. But I want to address the part that where he says that China can shut it down in a week. Like we mentioned, he did use the word the chemical precursor, right? So he recognized China is not manufacturing fentanyl. China is manufacturing the pharmaceutical precursor to make that's became a component for making the fentanyl. Like, why would you shut down a chemical, like a pharmaceutical factory, for making a precursor for making pharmaceuticals, right? I mean that he of course he understands that, but he just say that for the Fox News audience, and also he's claiming that somehow China has some kind of influence over gangs in Mexico. Like, again, show me the money, show me the evidence. How does China influence gangs in Mexico? And it's not China that's blaming Mexico. It's United States that's blaming Mexico. I mean, so again, it's all projection.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that it mentions that the Chinese were laundering money to drug cartels. Well, they have this huge authoritarian state with state-controlled banks. That's not happening. Like that's absurd. They're not going to allow that to happen. And the reality is, the drug cartels in Mexico are funded by U.S. banks. So
Exactly. U.S. has a financial hegemony over the world. Like, all these transactions are not in RMB. They're not in the RMB, Chinese currency. They're in U.S. dollars, right? U.S. financial hegemony is such that most of the world transaction is in U.S. dollars, and that's controlled by U.S. financial institutions. So again, like I say, whenever they say about China in United States, it's 100% projection. It's again, they're projecting again about the money laundering. But let's go on with the clip.
I just want to talk just quickly on the Chinese banking system. It's interesting that U.S. private banks, they seem to invest in war, drugs, laundering money to drug cartels, and what have you. Meanwhile, Chinese state-controlled banks are able to invest in infrastructure development, highways. I believe there's 90% home ownership in China, in comparison to millennials probably won't even get a house now. So it's interesting they're blaming Chinese banks when in reality we were able to, the Center for Political Innovation, which I'm a part of, puts forth the idea of nationalizing the banks, nationalizing the public resources, and we would be able to lift ourselves out of the mess we're in with those policies. I'll go ahead and continue.
Small packages of 2 or 3 pounds of fentanyl, either mixed with heroin or not, they have to be financed somehow. And the Chinese have allowed their international finance system to be used for money laundering. We've made this case to them, and they always say the same thing. You've got to be nicer to China, or we're not going to help you with fentanyl.
Well, they're not being nice, and I understand this kind of a rare thing. The Secretary of Defense, Austin, and his counterpart in China basically had a meeting. And in that meeting, they warned us to not be part of warming relations with Taiwan and do not arm Taiwan. No idea what we said back, but should we? Should we be arming Taiwan at a dizzying rate after we see what happens with Ukraine, when we were slow to arm them and what happened?
Well, we're required by law, by the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, to maintain Taiwan's ability to defend itself. But there's been a big debate over the last 40 years about just how to do that. What you have on the Dove side is, let's just give Taiwan the minimum to defend themselves. The other side has been, no, Taiwan needs to be a porcupine and needs to have some fear inspired in Beijing, that if we invade Taiwan, A, we'll lose, and B, the Americans will come and help. So there's been this debate that causes paralysis in how much we sell weapons to Taiwan. I hope the Ukraine experience will cause greater sales to Taiwan, because they have needs that are not being met.
Yeah, we'll see where this goes because you can't think about Russia and not think about what's next, and that would be China and Taiwan. And they say their relations with Russia have never been stronger. Mike, we'll continue to tap into your knowledge every time we need some insight on China, okay?
Okay,
Thanks, Brian.
this
Appreciate
is
it.
I went on Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox.
This is
Getting rid of
done.
that. Getting rid of that.
This is over. We don't need to subscribe to Fox News.
Okay.
And now that you made me watch this, YouTube algorithm is going to recommend Fox News channels on my YouTube feed. Thank you, Das.
I apologize.
No worries. That was for a good laugh. But again, this is they're talking about Ukraine and Taiwan analogy again. So how did U.S. not arm in Ukraine? U.S. have been sending billions of dollars worth of weapons to Ukraine, both prior and now. And how is that helping Ukraine anyway? I mean, now what all it does is prolonging the war, getting more Ukrainian killed, which is exactly what they want. U.S. officials were explicitly saying that they want Ukraine to be Russia's Afghanistan, want to be a quagmire. They want to fight Russians to the last Ukrainians, and that is the exact reason we're giving them weapons. We're not giving them weapons to prevent a war. Look, all the U.S. military, if U.S. had really wanted to prevent a war, they could have done so. They did not. What they actually prefer conflict. All the U.S. weapon manufacturers, right? They actually prefer a conflict where they can sell weapons. And this is exactly what happened to Ukraine, and this is what they want to happen with Taiwan. And also he lied about the Taiwan Relation Act, because Taiwan Relation Act was put in place in 1979 because at the time, U.S. finally normalized relationship with People's Republic of China and cut off recognition for the KMT government on Taiwan. And then during that time, U.S. Congress, all the people who are in the pockets of the so-called China lobby, that's a China lobby on Taiwan, then they put forth the Taiwan Relation Act. But it does not obligate United States to defend Taiwan. It just says U.S. can do what it can to help Taiwan meet its defense need. That's all it says. It's a recommendation. It's not obligation. It's a recommendation that U.S. should look into helping fulfill Taiwan's defense need. But it does not obligate U.S. to do anything. It does not obligate U.S. to defend Taiwan. It does not obligate U.S. to continue to sell weapons to Taiwan. But you know what? Selling weapons to Taiwan is big business. Selling billions of tens of billions, hundreds of billions worth of high sophisticated weapon platforms to Taiwan, that's good business for Boeing, for Raytheon. And those are also the company that happen to fund Mike Pillsbury's think tank and his foundation, right? That enabled him to go on Fox News to be the China expert to talk about this issue. So it's a very crooked game, man.
Yeah, I mean that clip is so infuriating. I actually didn't watch the last part. I was only planning for that very small portion, and I think it's good that everyone is talking about the situation in Ukraine, and there's a real big divide on the left. Honestly, I think the Western left is showing its Western chauvinism. If you look at the people of the world, they're standing with Russia. Mean, the people, I think the population in China is more in support of Russia than even the government comes off is being, and rightfully so. I mean, there's Nazis in Ukraine. They carried out a coup. It's the history of Western powers in Europe invading Russia. It was a defensive intervention to stop, an imperialist outpost on their border that was killing 14,000 people. Mostly ethnic Russian. It's an insane situation, and
look at the U.S.-Australia reaction to the recent security pact between China and Solomon Islands. Right, Solomon Islands is this is a Pacific island nation that's situated 2,000 kilometers away from Australian coastline. 2,000 kilometers, right? And U.S. and Australia are upping arms because they say, if first of all, China hasn't built a naval base in Solomon Islands. They just signed a security pact, but U.S. already said it's unacceptable if China put a base in Solomon Islands. They find both U.S. and Australia, all these talking heads already said that U.S. cannot rule out like an invasion of Solomon Islands if they go ahead and give Chinese Navy access to the Solomon Islands. Solomon Islands is 2,000 kilometers away from the shoreline of Australia. Ukraine is literally right next to Russia, right? So it's like when Russia says, hey, you are violating our security need, you're impinging our security needs by flooding Ukraine with weapons and all these NATO fundings. They're like, no, that's Ukraine's sovereignty. They have their own agency. But when it comes to Solomon Islands, like, oh no, you don't have agency. I'm sorry, you are endangering the security of Australia. We're gonna have to invade you if you like do something with China. So it's complete hypocrisy. And again, official Chinese government position on the Ukraine war is actually peaceful resolution of the conflict. They're calling to an end of the war. What U.S. and NATO is doing, they're fanning the flames. They're flooding Ukraine with hundreds of billions of weapons. To do what? To ensure peace? Hell no. They're too exasperating the conflict, escalating it, leading to death of more people. I mean, that is obvious to anyone who's been paying attention. I think, like, you're right, there's a bit of a split among the Western left. But again, like, the Western left has been so infiltrated by all these different intelligence agencies, man. Like, this is, a lot of the left have been led around by the nose of the U.S. State Department during the Syrian war. When people are cheering for the moderate rebels to overthrow the authoritarian regime of Bashar Assad. When we see like literally head choppers, on the street of Damascus, and inflicting insane amount of damage to the local civilian population. So while the Western left are comfortably sitting behind their computers and cheering on a conflict that they have very minimal understanding, right? A lot of the information they get through their media is flooded by either our intelligence services or just straight State Department readout. I mean, that's the situation we're living with. Then we have Fox News, which is just a whole different level.
Yeah, we're getting near the end. I don't want to go over an hour. Let's see. I don't really have anything else on that segment before we go into conclusions. Maybe if you could just address briefly the situation in Taiwan. Is there an escalation of conflict? Is the U.S. wasting our money and that could be going to our schools and sending more weapons? What's the situation?
Oh, okay. So U.S. So unlike the situation in Taiwan, so Taiwan situation is quite different because right now there's really very little talk of war, either on Taiwan or mainland China. Right now, people in China, the Chinese people on both sides of Taiwan Strait, do not expect a war to break out. The people who are constantly talking about war over Taiwan Strait, guess who? Talking heads in the U.S. media. It's almost like the U.S. talking heads are begging for war to break out over Taiwan, right? So they can sell more weapons. And I mean but it's the Taiwan conflict. It benefits. You will benefit U.S. weapon manufacturing. They're not necessarily taking away resources from U.S. domestically, but it's just more money for the to enrich the military-industrial complex. Even people on Taiwan understand all these expensive weapon platform they're buying United States is pretty useless when even a conflict does break out with mainland China. And like they're talking about Taiwan buying anti-submarine helicopters. What the hell does Taiwan need anti-submarine helicopters for? Like if in an event of a conflict they actually need to fly out a helicopter to hunt down PLA submarines, it will be too late because like there's a very unlikely scenario where such anti-submarine helicopters would survive, because that would assume that you have air superiority over Taiwan Strait. And the fact that why US is pressuring Taiwan to acquire anti-submarine helicopter, one is direct to fuel the military industrial complex in the United States, and two, it's not supposed to help in a war breaking out over mainland China per se, but they're supposed to be like to help the US 7th Fleet, tracking Chinese submarines movement during peacetime. Like I'm talking about right now, because everybody knew those helicopters would not survive in a war. When the war breaks out, those helicopters are gone. But right now, US like to unburden, to kind of share its burden of its empire, offload some of them on its client states like Taiwan and Japan. For example, United States plan for Japan is to build up Japan's military, which Japan's peace constitution prohibits Japan from having a military. So now Japan military is called, the self-defense force. So U.S. wants the Japan self-defense force Navy, which is one of the largest in East Asia, to function as an anti-submarine task force for the United States 7th Fleet. So U.S. can invest less in that area, but focus on other big ships like aircraft carriers. And so this is what United States is doing in East Asia. It's trying to maintain its kind of empire framework. It's trying to offload some of this empire burdens on its vassal states like Taiwan, like Japan, like Korea, and to contain China, because China threatens U.S. hegemony in East Asia, and that's where we are. But I mean, there's actually somebody who there was the recent, I forgot it was Daily Beast. I need to look up. There was an article. Oh, it was the U.S. It was Kobe, who is now, I think, who is now the CIA director. He actually wrote a memoir, and he talked about the U.S. contingency plan for China. And he said that the best case is to provoke a war where China will have to wage war on Taiwan. That way, we make China lose world sympathy. And in fact, it's better that China target civilian infrastructure in Taiwan. That will generate the kind of the atrocity porn footage that will beam around the world to shore up support for the United States. So what they are literally making Taiwan a sacrificial lamb, the way that Ukraine is being made into a sacrificial lamb, to shore up the empire. Like they don't actually care about the livelihood of average Taiwan civilians, right? The war is not good for anyone, but for U.S., for the empire, the war is good because it keeps the empire going, business going. It keeps the military-industrial complex business going. My baby is crying. I think my babysitter trying to calm down. So we may have to wrap up soon.
Okay, I'll go into conclusions right quick. So I labeled the episode "China is not our enemy." I'm not sure if you can see the thumbnail, but the thumbnail was a Chinese man lighting the cigarette of a American soldier during World War II with another cigarette. One of them had a both of them out lighting it. Kind of a moment of friendship. And in reality, the Chinese people are our friends, and the Chinese people have been, the Chinese government and organizing the Chinese people have been offering infrastructure projects all over the world and are not in competition with the United States, but want to act in cooperation.
The,
Go
the
ahead.
picture you mentioned, by the way, the Chinese farmer offering a lighter to the U.S. GI. That's a famous picture from World War II. This is. I saw the picture in a Chinese museum in Yunnan, World War II museum in Yunnan in 2019 on my visit, and they have prominent feature of kind of American participation to help China in World War II. I mean, they have a whole section devoted to American flying tigers. There's an American airman who helped China, to ferry supplies from India into China during World War II. And that picture of the of old Chinese farmer doing the lighter for the American GI, that was part of the exhibit. So I saw it in real life.
Very, very powerful. I think that's going to do it for today. Thank you, brother, from going on, for coming on, and have a good one.
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me a good laugh over that Fox segment. Way
right.
to start the morning.
All right.